Hey, what's up? Hello. I hope you all are doing well. It is now officially April, which means that we have completed the first quarter of 2021, which just feels wild given the prior year that happened and how slow this particular year seems to be progressing. And even more wild, in that time, that first quarter, I apparently have read 11 books. And so, sticking with my theme of the past, I'm really enjoying doing these quarterly wrap-up videos because for me it helps to sort of keep track just how much I'm reading per month, which is interesting to note. And then it also gives me a chance to talk about books in shorter spurts than it would if I did a full book review of everything, which if I did that, boy, would I do pretty much nothing else. So with that being said, let me tell you about the 11 books that I read in the first quarter of 2021. So in January, I read Winter House by Ben Gutterson, which you may recall because I did a review on it where I talked about how much I really was not interested in it. And I'm not going to go into any of that deep review here. You can watch it if you feel like it, but it is about this girl who lives with her very mean aunt and uncle, and she goes to a magical hotel called the Winter House Hotel, and there she makes a friend and then uncovers a dark family secret. Because don't we all uncover dark family secrets when we go to unusual hotels? This book is the first in a series. I think it's a 3-part series, and I mentioned in that review that I was probably going to wind up reading all of the rest of them, and now I don't think I am, because I feel like I'm past that phase. Like, it's no longer winter, it's now started to be spring. Maybe when next winter rolls around, if I feel like picking this up again, I will. They're just very straightforward, simple books to read. Even though I didn't enjoy them, it would be something that I sort of filled my time with in between longer, more attention-holding or attention-needy books. But I haven't read any of them yet. So let's move on and stop talking about this because I gave it 2 stars. And from there, I proceeded to listen to a number of audiobooks. And in fact, I embarked on Alyssa Cole's Reluctant Royals series, which is a contemporary romance series written by Alyssa Cole, who is a very prominent Black romance author. And all of these have Black women as the main character. And she does this thing where she's got one book that starts with this one person, and then the rest of them are characters who are all sort of somehow related to that initial person. It's great. Totally into that whole idea. So I listened to the first, is it 4? I think it's 3, and then sort of the little spin-off books. So the first being A Princess in Theory, the second being A Duke by Default, the third being A Prince on Paper. And then I sort of, after those main 3, I went back and listened to the 2 little novellas that were meant to go sort of in between. Once Ghosted, Twice Shy, which I think is a really cute title. And then the most recent one I listened to was Can't Escape Love. And I really enjoy these. I have recently as last year, started reading more contemporary romance books because I just am at a point where I can read a ton, sure, but ultimately I just want to see people be happy. And that's been really challenging in the last year. So I feel like contemporary romance books, because they are formulaic and nearly always, I think it might be a requirement of the genre that they have to end happily, or at least the resolution has to be comforting. I've been reading a lot of them, and these are particularly well done. I really, really liked A Princess in Theory, which is about a woman called Naledi, and she is actually a burgeoning epidemiologist in New York City who really doesn't know a lot about her family, and she gets these sort of weird spammy type emails from a assistant to a prince in a African country that she has never heard of, telling her that she is betrothed to him, and so she disregards them and finally just snaps and sends a nasty email back to them. And little does she know that this person is real. This is a real thing. She doesn't know a lot about her family, and she grew up in the foster care system, and no one's ever really informed her about her background or her parentage. And so this African prince from a country, made-up country called the Solo, comes to tell her that they are betrothed and ask why she hasn't been replying to his emails. And so it ensues from there because she is a very much like, I can do everything myself, very strong, very confident, very independent person, and so they grapple with their different personalities there. And she's also dealing with her best friend Portia, who is a little bit of a mess. And in the next book, which is A Duke by Default, Portia goes to Scotland. She actually goes to Edinburgh, Scotland, where I have lived, and she apprentices a sword maker who, lo and behold, discovers that he might have a royal connection himself. So I really, really enjoyed the first two. I super enjoyed Princess in Theory. A Duke by Default was great, with the exception of the fact that the woman who was narrating the books understandably did not do a great Scottish accent. It's very difficult to do a Scottish accent, particularly an Edinburgh accent. And also, I don't know whether or not Alyssa Cole has lived in Edinburgh, but some of the pieces of that scene setting were just incorrect, and it would take having lived there and lived in it to notice that, but I knew that going into it that was going to be something that upset me. And maybe she's just talking about pieces of Edinburgh that I didn't experience. Could be that too, but I was just frequently irked by the inaccuracy of some of the locational pieces there. And then I went on to read A Prince on Paper, which is about a very auxiliary character who is a prince from a tiny country that is essentially Luxembourg, and he is friends with the prince from A Princess in Theory, and he winds up being put in a situation with a woman who winds up being Naledi's cousin. So there's some crossover throughout all of the books, and I didn't enjoy A Prince on Paper nearly as much. I don't think it was plotted as well as the first two were. And in all three of the books, actually in every contemporary romance novel I read this quarter, it really became clear that romance novels are engaging because people don't communicate. And if we all just worked on communicating better and knowing our communication style and working to learn our partner's communication style, life would probably just be a whole lot easier, and we wouldn't have as many books because the plot wouldn't be there. What miscommunication can make somebody make a choice that then winds up giving me another 50 pages of material? I feel like that's the crux of every contemporary romance. And that definitely was happening in A Prince on Paper. So that's what I've learned from this. Not that it stopped me from reading any of these at all and looking for these different parts of the plot. Because then I went on to read Once Ghosted, Twice Shy, as I said, the first novella in this Reluctant Royalist series, which is about the Biso, who's the prince from A Princess in Theory. It's about his assistant and the woman that she's seeing in New York City. That I thought was really interestingly done. There's a lot of jumping back and forth, and it's definitely something that I wish I had been able to read physically, because the time periods were they seemed so similar. It was hard to figure out whether I was in the before or the after in just listening to it. But the one that I actually really enjoyed was Can't Escape Love, which is about Portia's twin sister Reggie, who has a disability, and she winds up being paired off with someone who it is very heavily alluded. Actually, this is a spoiler, so if you don't want to be spoiled for Can't Escape Love by Alyssa Cole, I would skip ahead approximately a minute and a half. Reggie winds up being paired with someone who it's very heavily alluded to is autistic, but it's never specifically said, and that super didn't sit well with me. I don't like the fact that the author was making us guess about whether or not this person experienced life that way. There aren't a lot of books out there about autistic characters, particularly ones who are main characters, and I just feel like it would have been important to say that up front, at least to the reader, even if the character wasn't ready to give that over and say that to the other people in the book. Along with that series, I also read Evie Drake Starts Over. I got this as a recommendation after watching a video of Olives from a book Olive, and Evie Drake Starts Over is just really lovely, super made me think. I gave it 4 stars, actually. I was really intrigued by the way it was written and the way it was plotted. It's about a woman who has recently become a widow, and she winds up renting out an apartment that's attached to her house to the friend of a friend, and they wind up getting to know each other. It's a whole thing. That's all I'll say, but I thought the fact that this dealt with miscommunication very, very well. I think these folks learned a lot about how to communicate with each other and how to say, I think it's better if we do this, which might not be what we want. It had more elements of what actually happens in some relationships in life. Not everything works out excellently in the end. I thought it was very, very nicely done. And I believe that Abby Drake Starts Over was written by a woman who works for National Public Radio, which is a great lead into the next book I read, which is The X Talk. This is a new release, I think, in 2021. I'm almost certain about that. And this is about two people who work at a public radio station in Washington State. And one of them has, come up through the ranks and was like the youngest person in whatever to do producing for this particular show. And she's unsettled by this new guy who comes in who is like fresh out of graduate school, which is really drilled home for you, let me tell you. And he has his master's degree, and he's younger than her, and he's already becoming sort of the fan favorite. But there's some budgetary stuff that happens, and they need a new show at the radio station, and so they put the two of them together on a podcast, which features the two of them pretending that they once dated and then broke up and are now exes who talk about different aspects of relationships. The problem I had with this particular book was that they're talking about it like it's a radio show, and I recognize that a lot of public radio these days also takes a lot of their shows and puts them into podcast form so that you can listen to them whenever, but it really seemed like this plot was getting the attention that a podcast would get, like as if they were making a podcast, but it was actually airing on public radio. I just feel like the focus sort of shifted a little bit too much. It was addressed as if it were a podcast and not as if it were a radio show, and maybe that was on purpose because the fact that they were really into public radio was put in your face. Like, we got it. These people like public radio. Don't we all? But like, seriously, didn't need to be that heavy. So I gave this book 3 stars. I actually wound up thinking about the way that these characters communicated with each other long after I had finished this book as well. So 2 examples of books that stuck with me from this genre that if you're looking for one to read, you might want to consider checking out. And the last contemporary romance that I read in the quarter was Undercover Bromance, which apparently is the second book in the Bromance Book Club series. I didn't know this at the time that I picked it up. I clearly didn't do enough sleuthing on Goodreads or something like that. But this is the second book in the Bromance Book Club series. This is a series about a bunch of like rich, prominent, quote unquote manly, as long as you're talking about like hetero cisgender males, people who all live in this city, and I've already forgotten what it is, and they all proudly read romance novels as men to apparently help save their relationships or something like that. I don't know, it was a premise that I wasn't super down with, but this particular one is about the guy who leads the book club and having met his match in this one woman who is fired from her job for trying to intervene in a sexual harassment issue at work, and then trying to crusade to expose this particular high power, very famous man. And so they team up together, and I wonder what happens when they team up together. So I wasn't super into this. I found it difficult to follow. I found it sort of difficult to read what everybody was really thinking. Maybe it would have helped if I had read the first one and gotten a better understanding of the author's writing and some of the auxiliary characters in there too. But I think I gave this one 2 stars. I mean, it was interesting. I finished the book, but I don't know, it wasn't my favorite. If you've read anything from this series, I would love to know your thoughts. And the final book that I read in the first quarter was Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Silver Flames. This is the 4th, maybe 5th, depending on what you're thinking about if you consider A Court of Frost and Starlight, book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. And this focuses on Feyre's sister Nesta and Cassian, who is the general of the Night Court. You'd think, having just read it last weekend, I would have that better committed to memory. This book is quite large. I think it's like 700 plus pages, and it's a ride. There is a lot of mental health journey in this book for Nesta, which this book takes place after the war that happens in the first 3/4 books. And Nesta is certainly struggling with some very obvious symptoms of depression, very obvious symptoms of PTSD, and a lot of these are not handled very well by some of the other characters, and a lot of them are either brushed aside or Nesta is left to figure out how to deal with them on her own. And does she do a very good job? She doesn't. And part of that is because of her nature, but also because she's not pointed toward the right resources. And also because, I guess, in Prythian, they don't have therapists. Which seems weird to me, for all Prythian, and especially the Night Court, is lauded as being such a kind, welcoming, humane place where everybody has a choice. I've read a lot of interesting reviews about this book, some of whom say that it's excellent, and some of whom say this is terrible. There's a lot of criticism of the character Rhys, which I guess there's been a lot of criticism of the character Rhys for forever. All of which I do agree with, but particularly the way that he deals with Nesta and some specific secret keeping that he does in this book. I don't know. I had a lot of difficulty reading this book. It was very hard to read, not because of the writing or anything, but it was difficult to watch so many different people struggle with so many of their own different demons, per se. In here, eventually Nesta does meet some other characters, each of whom also has had a struggle that they've borne in the past and are now trying to work through, and they wind up working through it together. It's hard to say a lot about this book without saying too much, but if you have read the series and you've also finished this, I'd be interested to know your thoughts down in the comments. I don't know how I feel about this one. I don't know. But all that being said, those are the 11 books that I read in the first quarter of 2021. If you have any particular thoughts about any of them, or you've read them, or you want to offer what you think, please put that all in the comments below. Anything that you might want to know about us is in the description. As always, I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you very soon.